Inside the northern passage of the Great Pyramid of Giza, beyond the stone blocks tourists are allowed to see, there is a section of masonry that does not match the rest of the structure. It is not the stone itself that disturbed the early surveyors. It was the mark above it. A small cluster of symbols carved into the limestone, no wider than a human hand, almost invisible unless light strikes it from the side. 3 signs: a falling star, a sealed vessel, and the determinative for sacred property. For more than a century, Egyptologists classified the mark as a mason's notation, a construction sign, a quarry mark, something practical, something ordinary. But the older temple records describe it differently. They do not call it a block. They do not call it treasure. They call it the thing that came down before the king had a name. And according to the inscription, it was not placed inside the Great Pyramid after construction. The pyramid was built to contain it. In the next several minutes, we follow the symbols, the missing inventory lists, the priestly warnings, and the underground surveys that all point to the same impossible claim: that somewhere beneath the Great Pyramid, sealed behind stone and silence, the Egyptians hid an object they believed had fallen from the sky. And whatever it was, the pharaohs never allowed it to be seen again. The official explanation of the Great Pyramid is simple. It was built as the tomb of Pharaoh Khufu during the 4th dynasty, around 4,500 years ago. A monument of stone, a royal burial place, a machine of resurrection. But there is a problem with that explanation. No body of Khufu has ever been found inside it. No royal mummy, no funerary treasure, no inscriptions praising the king inside the main chambers. Nothing that matches what later Egyptian tombs clearly show. Instead, the pyramid contains empty chambers, blocked passages, strange shafts, sealed doors, and architectural choices that become harder to explain the longer you look at them. The king's chamber is not decorated. The queen's chamber was never used for a queen. The so-called air shafts do not function like normal ventilation. And beneath the entire structure, cut into the bedrock, there is an unfinished subterranean chamber that looks less like a tomb and more like a place abandoned after something was already sealed away. Mainstream Egyptology says this is not mysterious, but the hieroglyphs say otherwise. Not the public inscriptions, not the tourist inscriptions. The older records, the ones copied by priests, stored in temple archives, and later destroyed, buried, or quietly left untranslated. One fragment, catalogued in a private temple inventory from the late period, refers to a sacred object called the descent stone. The phrase is unusual. The Egyptians had words for meteorites. They had words for sacred stones. They had words for pyramid caps, benbein stones, divine images, and ritual objects. But this phrase does not behave like the others. It is written with a falling star sign, followed by a container glyph, followed by a warning determinative normally used for objects that could not be handled without purification. That matters. Because Egyptian scribes did not waste signs, every determinative narrowed the meaning. Every symbol told the reader what category the thing belonged to. And this object was not categorized as a normal stone. It was categorized as something sacred, dangerous, and sealed. The first clue appears in a damaged inscription connected to the priests of Heliopolis. Heliopolis was the city of the sun, the center of Egypt's oldest solar theology, the place where the benben stone was worshipped. According to tradition, the benben was the first mound that rose from the waters of chaos, the place where creation began, the point where the sun god first appeared. But the older version of the story is stranger. It says the sacred stone did not merely represent the first mound. It came down. It descended from the sky and was placed under guard. Later, priests softened the language. They made it symbolic. They turned the object into theology. But the earliest phrasing is physical. A thing came down. The priests measured it. They covered it. They moved it under royal command. And then the record breaks. The missing section has always been explained as damage, but the remaining sentence resumes with a warning. No unpurified hand shall open the stone house beneath the horizon of Khufu. The Horizon of Khufu. That is the ancient name of the Great Pyramid. Not the plateau, not Giza generally, the pyramid itself. So why would a Heliopolitan priestly text mention a sealed stone house beneath Khufu's horizon? And why would the warning be attached to an object described as having descended? The second clue comes from the layout of the pyramid. The Great Pyramid is built with an obsession for alignment. Its sides face the cardinal directions with extreme precision. Its shafts point towards specific regions of the sky. Its internal passages rise and descend at angles that do not appear accidental. To mainstream scholars, this is religious architecture, a symbolic path for the soul of the king. But the hidden object theory reads the pyramid differently. Not as a tomb, not as a temple, as a containment structure, a massive stone envelope built around a central absence. Look at the internal arrangement. The descending passage leads into the bedrock. The ascending passage is blocked by granite plugs. The grand gallery rises like a controlled access corridor. The king's chamber sits high within the structure, built with red granite brought from Aswan, a material harder and more difficult to work than the surrounding limestone. Above it are relieving chambers designed to absorb pressure. But pressure from what? The official answer is weight. The chambers protect the king's chamber from the mass of stone above it. That is reasonable. But then, why are the internal systems so overbuilt compared to later tombs? Why use granite plugs? Why seal passages with such force? Why create a monument that appears less designed for entry than for permanent closure? The script of the stones is clear. The pyramid does not invite. It prevents. The third clue is the so-called inventory tradition. Ancient temples kept lists, offerings, ritual objects, sacred images, metals, oils, linens, instruments, and stones. Some objects were ordinary. Some were divine property. Some were considered too dangerous to name directly. In one damaged inventory fragment linked to Memphis, an object is described only by title. The black one from the sky, resting beneath the northern star path. The phrase black one is not decorative. The Egyptians used color terms carefully. Black could mean fertility. Black could mean the Nile silt. Black could mean resurrection. But when paired with sky descent language, it points somewhere else. A dark stone, possibly iron-rich, possibly meteoritic, something that fell from heaven before iron smelting became common in Egypt. The Egyptians knew of iron from meteorites long before large-scale ironworking. They called certain sky metal materials divine. To them, metal that fell from the sky was not just useful. It was evidence that the heavens had touched the earth. Now imagine a large object falling in the desert, blackened, dense, magnetic, impossible to shape with early tools, worshipped first as divine, feared later as unstable, moved by priests, hidden by kings. That is the story the scattered symbols seem to tell. But the most disturbing clue is found in the blocked chamber tradition. Arab writers from the medieval period recorded legends about the Great Pyramid containing ancient knowledge, star maps, strange devices, and objects placed there before a catastrophe. Mainstream historians dismiss these as folklore. But folklore often preserves the shape of something older. One account describes a sealed chamber containing a vessel that could not be opened. Another speaks of a stone that answered the stars. Another describes a hidden object under the pyramid, guarded by mechanical or magical protections. These are not identical stories. They come from different periods, different writers, different traditions. And yet the pattern repeats. A sealed object, a sky connection, a warning, a chamber beneath Giza. At some point, coincidence becomes difficult to defend. The object itself is never described directly in complete form. That is what makes the record so strange. Egyptian texts describe gods in detail. They describe enemies. They describe battles. They describe taxes, grain, cattle, boats, temples, offerings, diseases, dreams, stars, and funerary rituals. But this object is always described around its absence. The thing that descended, the sealed one, the black one, the vessel beneath the horizon, the stone that must not be opened, the object without a spoken name. This is not normal religious language. This is restricted language, the kind used by priesthoods when the name of a thing was believed to carry power, danger, or legal consequence. In Egyptian belief, naming something made it active. To speak the name was to call it into the world. So when a text refuses to name an object, that refusal is itself information. They were not confused. They were careful. Now we come to the hieroglyphs. The small inscription near the northern internal masonry does not contain a long story. It contains a label, and labels are often more dangerous than myths because they were written for people who already knew the context. The first sign shows descent from the sky. The second sign shows enclosure. The third sign marks sacred restriction. Together, the reading is not decoration, not quarry mark, not worker gang name. The most direct translation is, that which descended is sealed. Below it, nearly erased, is another sign. A horizon, not a generic horizon. A horizon with the phonetic value connected to Khufu's pyramid name, meaning the label can also be read as, that which descended is sealed in the Horizon of Khufu, the Great Pyramid. If that reading is correct, the inscription is not marking construction. It is marking containment. But where? The obvious answer would be the king's chamber. That is where everyone looks. That is where explorers drilled, scanned, measured, and argued for centuries. But the texts do not point upward. They point downward. The phrase used in the late period fragment is not within the king's chamber. It is not above the gallery. It is beneath the horizon, beneath the pyramid, below the stone body, inside or under the bedrock. This leads directly to the unfinished subterranean chamber, the chamber cut deep below the pyramid, reached by the descending passage. Officially, it is unfinished. A change of plan. The builders started underground, then abandoned it and moved higher. But that explanation has never satisfied everyone. The chamber is rough, chaotic, almost violent in its cutting. A dead-end space beneath the most precise stone structure on Earth. Why would the builders abandon it? Or did they stop because they reached what they were looking for? What if the chamber was never meant to be finished? What if it was only the outer scar left by a deeper sealing operation? In the 19th century, explorers forced their way through parts of the pyramid with gunpowder and iron. They opened passages. They crawled through shafts. They searched for treasure. But they were not reading the pyramid as priests would have read it. They looked for rooms. They looked for gold. They looked for a mummy. They did not look for a containment system. and they did not understand the danger language of temple inventory marks. That is why the small northern glyph cluster was dismissed, a mark too small to matter, a note left by builders, a meaningless scratch. But the Egyptians did not place meaningless warnings inside sacred architecture, especially not inside a royal monument, especially not near sealed masonry. The modern scans make the story harder to ignore. Over the last decade, non-invasive survey technologies have detected unknown spaces inside the Great Pyramid. Muon radiography revealed a large void above the Grand Gallery. Thermal scanning showed anomalies in blocks on the pyramid's faces. Robotic investigations found small doors with metal fittings inside the shafts. Every time the pyramid is scanned, it gives back another absence, another void, another sealed path, another place the official plan did not predict. And yet, the deepest zones beneath the pyramid remain the least publicly understood. That is the pattern. The upper voids are discussed. The shaft doors are debated. The chambers tourists can imagine are animated in documentaries. But the lower bedrock anomalies are treated carefully, quietly, technically, without drama, without conclusion, and without access. Why? Because if the descent texts are correct, the object was never hidden high inside the monument. It was sealed below it. The pyramid was not the box. It was the lock. There is another detail almost no one talks about. The Great Pyramid's original casing stones would have made it shine. In the sunlight, the pyramid would not have looked like a pile of blocks. It would have looked like a white geometric mountain, a horizon made visible, a solar object on Earth. If something had fallen from the sky, and if the priests believed it belonged to the sun, the stars, or the gods, then sealing it beneath a shining artificial horizon would not be random. It would be ritual logic. The object came from above, so they placed it beneath a structure that connected earth and sky. They did not bury it like waste. They enthroned it like danger, hidden, honored, contained. The priesthood of Heliopolis may have known the oldest version of the story. The priests of Ptah may have handled the material reality of it, and the kings of the Fourth Dynasty may have transformed the problem into architecture. That would explain why the Great Pyramid feels different from later tombs. Later tombs are burial places. The Great Pyramid feels like a machine built around a secret. No paintings, no obvious royal scenes, no body, no treasure. Just passages, plugs, chambers, angles, shafts, and sealed voids. A structure that says nothing because the thing it protects was never meant to be named. Then came the erasures. During later religious reforms, older cult objects were reinterpreted. Dangerous physical objects became symbols. Sky stones became creation myths. Containment chambers became tomb theories. Priestly warnings became ritual poetry. The object disappeared from history not because it was removed, but because its meaning was rewritten. That is how suppression often works. Not by destroying every stone, by changing the category. A dangerous object becomes a sacred symbol. A containment structure becomes a tomb. A warning becomes a metaphor. A sealed chamber becomes an unfinished room. And once the language changes, the truth can sit in plain sight for thousands of years. But the old words remain. That which descended, the sealed one, the black one from the sky, the vessel beneath the horizon, the stone no hand shall open. Different fragments, different periods, same direction. Down, under Khufu, under the horizon, under the pyramid. And that is where the story becomes uncomfortable, because we have the technology to look. We can scan stone. We can map voids. We can detect density differences. We can send robots into shafts smaller than a human hand. We can model hidden chambers without breaking a single block. So if the Great Pyramid is just an empty tomb, why has every deeper anomaly not been mapped publicly in full? Why are the most interesting zones always described in careful language? Why are results released slowly, partially, and without final answers? Maybe the answer is boring. Maybe there is nothing there. Maybe the object was myth. Maybe the inscriptions are symbolic. Maybe every strange mark is just a construction note. That is the safe explanation. But safe explanations do not remove the symbols. They do not erase the sealed passages. They do not explain why the oldest traditions keep pointing to something that came from the sky and was hidden beneath stone. Imagine the object as the Egyptians might have seen it. A fire in the night. A sound across the desert. A black mass, half buried in sand. Too heavy to move easily. Too strange to cut. Metal where no mine existed. Stone that had passed through the heavens. The priests arrive first, then the king, then the engineers. They do not understand it as we would. They do not call it meteorite. They do not call it artifact. They call it divine, then dangerous, then forbidden. Generations pass. The object becomes a cult. The cult becomes a secret. The secret becomes a project. And the project becomes the largest stone structure ever built. Not to celebrate a dead king, but to make sure what fell from the sky never rose again. There is one final inscription. It appears in a damaged ritual line connected to opening ceremonies. The translation is disputed. Most render it symbolically, but read literally. It says, "The mouth of the sky was closed with stone." For years, this was treated as poetry, a metaphor for creation, a line about the sun. But if the descent object was real, the meaning changes. The sky opened. Something came through, and the Egyptians closed it with stone. Not above, below. Beneath the horizon of Khufu, beneath the Great Pyramid, where no tourist is allowed to go, or where no complete public map exists, where the oldest warning still makes sense. That which descended is sealed. And if the pyramid was built as the lock, then the real question is not what the Egyptians hid. The real question is why they were so afraid someone would open it again.